He was the fourth son of Elizabeth, and I had no choice but to choose him as my husband due to my numerous military achievements. His calm demeanor and pleasing appearance made the decision easier.
I don't intend to take any concubines.
But you brought a man back.
That's none of your business.
Immediately, I regretted my harsh tone. Ethan, my husband, deserved better. But it really wasn't his concern. I looked at Ethan, whose face remained expressionless, but I knew he was upset.
I found him during a battle. He looked pitiful, so I brought him back.
Seeing that Ethan was no longer angry, I felt much more relaxed and happily needed his hand.
What will you do with him now?
I haven't thought about that yet.
Perhaps I didn't control my strength well, and Ethan let out a cry of pain. I quickly looked down and saw a red mark. His eyes were slightly red, and tears clung to his eyelashes.
Then let me handle it.
All right.
Right now, my eyes were full of him, and I couldn't care less about anyone else. I gently pulled him closer and kissed him. Indeed, my husband was fragrant everywhere.
Fortunately, there was a bed in the study, otherwise, I would have had to carry him back to the courtyard, which would have been troublesome. I picked him up, and his hand lightly clutched the front of my clothes. This dependent posture made me extremely happy.
It's not dark yet.
It's okay. No one will come in.
But
I knew Ethan was very shy about such things. As the head of the household, I had to take on this responsibility.
Ethan, I miss you so much.
Sure enough, his hand dropped. I knew it. Ethan couldn't resist when I acted coy.
I held Ethan, kissing him here and there. Seeing the marks I left on his body filled me with satisfaction. I focused on his right shoulder, noticing that the mark there had faded. I had to fix that. I carefully sucked on the spot, afraid of waking him. I heard Ethan mumble in his sleep.
James, stop.
I paused, feeling guilty. It was my fault for exhausting Ethan so much. It was already dark. I wanted to get out of bed and give some instructions to the kitchen, but I remembered the morning after our wedding. I returned from my early training to find Ethan lying in bed, looking downcast.
Where did you go?
That insecure look left a deep impression on me. I looked down at the sleeping Ethan and gave up the idea of getting out of bed. If I left and Ethan woke up, what would I do? I rubbed Ethan's waist, my eyes fixed on his right shoulder.
Awake?
I quickly leaned over to finish what I had started. Soon, I looked at the fresh mark on his right shoulder, feeling utterly satisfied.
It's too late now. The cooks must be asleep. I'll make you a bowl of noodles. Will that do? All right.
Then put on your clothes and come with me to the kitchen.
Okay.
Without another word, I quickly dressed. When I turned to look at Ethan, he hadn't moved. Well, he was tired. I should dress him. I picked up his clothes, but then awkwardly put them down. I had torn them too much, they were unwearable.
How about I go make the noodles, and you wait here?
Ethan looked at me, lowered his head, and said nothing.
How about you wrap yourself in the blanket, and I'll take you to your courtyard to change clothes. Then we can go to the kitchen?
I saw Ethan's lips curl up slightly, and he nodded shyly. The distance wasn't long, but I was starving. I couldn't let my breathing get erratic, though. I didn't want Ethan to think he was too heavy or that I was weak. After all, what kind of head of the household can't carry her husband? Once Ethan was behind the screen, I dared to take a deep breath. I needed to train more to avoid embarrassing myself in front of Ethan. Ethan changed his clothes and looked at me. I took his hand and led him to the kitchen. I handed Ethan a large bowl of noodles and prepared to eat. Soon, Ethan poked me. I looked up, asking with my eyes what was wrong.
I can't finish it.
I looked at the bowl, which was almost untouched, though the vegetables were gone.
You've barely touched it. Eat a bit more.
I looked at Ethan, who was quite tall. How could he eat so little? What if he got hungry?
I don't want to eat anymore.
Why?
Ethan pursed his lips, remaining silent. Alice knew this little prince needed some coaxing.
Come on, little prince, let me feed you. Give me some face and take a bite.
Ethan was amused by Alice's words and gave in, taking a bite. Before long, Alice had fed him more than half the bowl.
No more, I'm almost full.
Alice touched Ethan's slightly bulging belly and realized he was indeed full. She quickly finished what he left and then started on her own bowl. Though the noodles were a bit clumpy, they still tasted fine.
I'm getting fat.
Alice understood why Ethan didn't want to eat.
Did you hear me panting earlier?
Ethan nodded slightly, looking a bit aggrieved under the candlelight.
That was because I hadn't eaten. If I had, I wouldn't be panting. I could carry you around the general's mansion 3 times without getting tired. Don't skip meals. It's a pity to lose the weight you've gained.
Alice looked at Ethan, who didn't nod or speak, just stared at her. She felt a pang of heartache for the boy who had lost his father early and lived alone in the palace.
Don't be afraid. Eat as much as you want. Even if you become as round as a ball, I can still carry you.
Ethan smiled subtly, a slight curve of his lips and a twinkle in his eyes.
How could I get that fat?
Just saying. See, isn't it impressive that I can carry you without panting?
Ethan playfully punched Alice's shoulder.
Shameless.
One more lap, and then we'll go to sleep. Get up early tomorrow, and I'll run a few laps with you. You fainted so quickly today, it's no fun for me alone.
Ethan pursed his lips and glared at Alice, punching her a few more times.
You need to get up earlier and exercise. Your health is already poor, and I'm just a rough person. If one day, I wasn't careful.
Alice shook her head. No, this was non-negotiable.
Exercise after you return from the morning court.
No way.
By the time Alice returned from the morning court, the sun would be up, and Ethan might get sunburned. Her firm stance made him punch her again, but it didn't hurt at all.
Then.
Before Ethan could finish, a voice interrupted.
General?
Ethan's mouth opened and then closed. He struggled to get off Alice, who was afraid he'd fall, so she put him down.
General, it's really you. I thought you were asleep.
Alice glanced at Ethan, who looked unhappy, and then at the joyful Lily.
Not yet. Why aren't you asleep?
General, I miss home a bit. Can you walk with me?
Alice was in a dilemma. Leave Ethan to walk with Lily? That was unrealistic.
Where are you from, sir? If you miss home, I'll have the accountant give you some money tomorrow so you can go home early.
General, who is this? Why is he rubbing salt in Lily's wound? General, Lily's heart hurts.
Alice looked at the heartbroken Lily and then at her unhappy husband.
Lily, this is my husband. He doesn't know your situation, it's unintentional. Don't mind it.
Lily wiped away his tears, looking at Alice pitifully.
General, I didn't know he was your husband. But it's strange. How could he not know about my situation if he's your husband? Could it be that he's jealous and can't stand seeing you with me?
Lily sobbed and tugged at Alice's sleeve.
Husband, Lily really didn't mean it. Lily just misses home. I'm unfamiliar with this place and only know the general. Please don't misunderstand.
Though Lily spoke to Ethan, he tugged at Alice's sleeve. Alice immediately looked at Ethan, who glared at her and left in a huff.
What should I do? Is your husband angry with me? It's all Lily's fault.
Lily clung to Alice's sleeve tightly as she watched Ethan's retreating figure.
General, why did your husband leave you? If it were me, I would never leave you.
Amy didn't have time to listen to Lily. She grabbed Ethan's collar and quickly led him to his guest room using her light-footed skills.
Lily, it's late. You should sleep early. I'll leave now.
Amy hurried to find Ethan. It was dark, and she worried he might stumble.
Ethan, are you upset?
No!
From his tone, it was clear he was upset.
Ethan, slow down. It's pitch dark. Be careful not to fall. I'd be worried sick.
Ethan glanced back at her and stopped. Amy quickly ran over and picked him up.
I'm not a child, Amy.
Amy realized he had gained some weight and become bolder over time.
Oh well, you're my little darling. I'll spoil you for a lifetime.
As soon as Amy lay down on the bed, she hugged Ethan. Life felt blissful, but Ethan pushed her away, his expression serious.
What's wrong? Still upset?
Amy, a grand general, even the empress had to show her respect. Now her husband dared to give her the cold shoulder.
What's wrong? Why are you unhappy? Tell me, and let your wife cheer you up.
Ethan slapped her lightly.
What do you plan to do with Lily?
Amy tentatively wrapped her arms around his waist. He didn't react, so she held him tightly.
I already said, I'll listen to you.
Ethan's lips curled up slightly, but he kept a stern face.
Send him back.
Amy felt a bit troubled.
His home is in Liu'er, which is far away. Besides, due to the war, he's the only one left in his family. Sending him back might be a bit.
Seeing Ethan's frown, Amy stopped.
Then what do you want to do?
I plan to buy him a house in the suburbs. According to him, he can play the zither. We can send him to a music school, and we won't have to worry about him anymore.
Ethan pushed her away, turned his head, and then turned back to hit her hard.
If he gets into trouble and comes to you, will you help him?
Seeing the anger in Ethan's eyes, Amy didn't dare nod.
If he reaches marriageable age and no matchmaker comes, will you marry him?
Amy gently patted Ethan's hand.
Don't talk nonsense. Having you is enough for me.
Then send him back.
Amy hesitated again. Sending a delicate young man back would be like pushing him into the fire. Seeing her hesitation, Ethan angrily grabbed a pillow. Amy quickly stopped him.
It's the middle of the night. What are you doing with a pillow?
Ethan pulled the pillow from her hand, looking at her angrily.
I have no feelings for him.
You may not have feelings for him, but I can see he has feelings for you.
At the general's mansion entrance, people were coming and going. If his word spread, how could Ethan show his face?
Ethan isn't like that. I knew about this and agreed to it.
Lily looked hurt, on the verge of tears, but his actions were swift as he hugged Amy.
But what did Lily do wrong to make the general's sister treat me like this? Lily will change. Just don't send me away. Lily has feelings for you.
Amy's hand had just touched his shoulder to push him away when she felt a strong gaze from afar, making her tremble. She looked over and saw Ethan. Even from a distance, she could feel his anger. He turned and walked away, and she didn't have time to chase after him. Amy pushed Lily away, perhaps a bit too hard, as he fell to the ground, looking shocked. She didn't care and turned to chase after Ethan. Lily was indeed a burden, and his heart was malicious, daring to sow discord between Ethan and her.
Ethan, are you upset?
He glanced at me without saying a word. Oh no, he was so upset he wouldn't even speak. I looked at the servants coming and going, pulled him aside, and whispered in his ear.
Ethan, there are so many people around. At least respond to me. I'm still a general, you know. If word gets out, it'll be so embarrassing.
I looked at him with a face full of grievance. He looked at me and spoke a bit harshly.
No!
He turned and walked away. I quickly followed. Thankfully, there was still a chance to make amends. Reputation was nothing compared to Ethan talking to me. Anyway, my reputation for being henpecked had spread throughout the capital. I didn't mind it getting worse.
Ethan, just take a bite. You'll be hungry if you don't eat.
I held the bowl, scratching my head. Ethan was perfect in every way, except for this. When he got upset, he would shut himself away and refuse to eat or drink, which worried me to no end. He glanced at me, turned his head away, and ignored me. I walked to one side, and Ethan's head turned to the other. When I walked to the other side, Ethan's head turned back. I got angry, put the bowl down heavily, and sat on a nearby stool. Ethan seemed startled by my reaction, pursed his lips, and looked at me with a hint of grievance in his eyes. I grabbed him, pulled him onto my lap, and patted his hand, scolding him.
Why won't you eat? If you're upset, you can hit me. If you can't bear to hit me, you can throw things. But you can't refuse to eat.
He rolled his eyes at me, acting petulant and refusing to speak.
Ethan, be good. If there's something wrong, let's talk about it. Don't make things hard for yourself. Let's eat.
He glanced at me, then at the bowl on the table. I immediately picked up the bowl and handed it to him, watching him eat.
How can I eat with you staring at me like that?
He struggled to get off my lap and sat on a nearby stool. I touched my nose and lowered my head to eat.
Let's send Lily away.
The corners of his mouth twitched slightly before he pretended to be calm and replied with a simple Then he looked up, wiped the corner of his mouth, and spoke slowly.
I'll send him to the neighboring city of Shuzhou. The atmosphere there is good, and I have shops there. I can look after him if needed.
I'll listen to you.
When I returned, I heard a servant shouting.
Quick, someone help. The main consort and Mr. Lily have both fallen into the water.
My heart skipped a beat. Ethan had fallen into the water. I rushed to the lake and immediately saw Lily struggling. Glancing to the side, I saw Ethan. Without hesitation, I jumped into the water, pulled Ethan out, and patted his face, pressing on his abdomen a few times. I saw Ethan cough a few times, spit out some water, and wake up.
Ethan, are you okay?
Ethan smiled at me and had just said, still, when a voice from afar interrupted him. I looked over, annoyed.
General's sister, brother-in-law, pushed me into the water. You have to stand up for me.
Holding Ethan, I stood up, my eyes cold as if looking at a dead person.
Stand up for you?
He didn't understand my gaze and kept nodding.
Fine, I'll stand up for you. Someone, send him back to Liu'er.
His face turned pale, and he grabbed my hem, crying.
General's sister, are you sending me to my doom?
Your fate has nothing to do with me.
I held Ethan, placed him on the bed, and called for a doctor to check on him. The servants tactfully withdrew. Ethan looked at me, his voice tinged with laughter.
Why don't you believe what he said? That I pushed him.
I kissed Ethan gently and spoke tenderly.
My Ethan is so kind. How could he do such a thing? Even if you did push him, it must have been because he made you angry. My Ethan could never be wrong.
Ethan laughed, leaned on my shoulder, and affectionately called.
James.
Ethan didn't like going out. Thinking about the recent incident with Lily, I worried he might feel uncomfortable staying at home. So, I took advantage of my day off to force him out. His eyes sparkled, and the corners of his mouth lifted unconsciously. Seeing him like this made me feel incredibly happy. He turned to look at me, and I quickly stepped forward to hold his hand. This little ancestor clung to me especially tightly when we were outside, making my heart melt with his obedience. I saw someone selling candied hawthorn not far away and thought Ethan might like it. I patted Ethan, who was looking at small trinkets, and pointed to the candied hawthorn.
I'll buy it for you. You stay here and look at these little things. I'll be right back.
He glanced at the candied hawthorn, nodded, and let go of my hand.
Here you go, sir.
I took the candied hawthorn and noticed a nearby stall selling cats out of the corner of my eye. Curious, I walked over and saw an orange cat. For some reason, it reminded me of Ethan, so I decided to buy it.
You bought a cat.
Ethan's tone seemed particularly excited and happy. I looked at him and teased.
Yes, look, doesn't it look like you? As soon as I saw it, I felt it was mine, just like you, Ethan. You're mine too.
There are so many people here.
I handed the things to a servant and patted his head.
Okay, I won't say it.
James put down his chopsticks and took the candied hawthorn from the servant, handing it to Ethan.
I noticed you don't have many accessories. Let's go buy some.
Ethan nodded, and James took him to the most famous jewelry store in the capital. Ethan was very fond of the items there. He stopped eating the candied hawthorn and handed it to James, who casually gave it to a servant. James watched as Ethan tried on the jewelry piece by piece.
Does it look good?
Ethan handed James a white jade hairpin, his eyes bright with anticipation.
It's elegant and suits you very well. It's beautiful.
Ethan smiled, his eyes filled with delight.
Shall we buy this one?
Sure, let's also look at some bracelets.
Ethan nodded with a smile.
Sir, we have many new and beautiful earrings. Would you like to take a look?
Ethan pursed his lips, feeling down. Wearing earrings required pierced ears, but Ethan's father had passed away early, and no one in the palace paid attention to such things. To this day, Ethan didn't have pierced ears.
My husband is afraid of pain. His ear piercings closed up years ago, and I couldn't bear to make him go through it again.
Ethan glanced at James, lowered his head, and didn't speak, but the corners of his mouth lifted.
Your husband is very fortunate to have you. But we also have clip-on earrings that don't require piercings. Would you like to see them?
James looked at Ethan, seeking his opinion. Ethan nodded and tugged at James's sleeve, signaling him to hurry. Ethan was enthusiastically picking out earrings. James noticed a green bracelet and thought it would suit Ethan's wrist. James took the bracelet and gently put it on Ethan's wrist, staring at it for a while.
It suits you very well.
Ethan looked at James, his eyes twinkling with laughter. Later, Ethan played the zither in the pavilion while James read military books. Life was so pleasant.
James.
A cheerful voice called out, infectious and uplifting. James put down the book, and Ethan stopped playing. They looked up and saw Lucas. The Wu family and the Zhang family had been friends for generations, but in recent years, due to the war, they had less contact. James was 5 years older than Lucas, so he could bear the title of sister.
What brings you here? Did you upset your elder sister again?
As soon as Lucas entered, the air was filled with joy.
Ethan is here, too. James, how could you think that? I didn't upset my sister. She asked me to invite you to a meal at Tingxian Pavilion tomorrow.
Since when was Martha so generous? Are you sure she invited me to eat and not to pay the bill?
James, she won't make you pay. It's really an invitation to eat.
Lucas's tone was very pleasant to hear.
Then there must be something going on. Did your sister say what it was?
Lucas blushed, fidgeting, and stole a glance at Ethan.
I'm a bit tired. I'll head back to the courtyard.
Before James could respond, Ethan walked away on his own. Watching his back, James felt a bit uneasy.
James, did you hear what I said?
What did you say? Sorry, Lucas, say it again. I'll listen carefully.
Lucas huffed but then spoke shyly.
My sister said it's time for me to get married. She set up a table at Tingxian Pavilion and asked you to come help me choose.
Hearing this, James laughed heartily.
I can't believe the little boy who used to follow me around is now getting married. Don't worry, Lucas. Your sister may not be reliable, but I am.
Lucas huffed again, lifting his hem to leave. After a few steps, he turned back.
James, you have to choose carefully. This is my lifelong happiness.
Got it! Got it!
Watching Lucas's figure, James felt a surge of emotion. Time had passed so quickly. James carefully pulled the blanket up, leaving only Ethan's head exposed, and couldn't resist kissing the corner of his mouth again. His hand mischievously slipped under the blanket, hugging Ethan's waist and gently rubbing it. Ethan's eyelashes fluttered, and James felt secretly delighted. Morning exercises were indeed effective. Ethan used to fall asleep by this point.
Tomorrow is a rest day. I'll go find a future partner for Lucas. I won't be home for lunch, so make sure you eat properly, okay?
Ethan opened his eyes and turned to look at James.
A partner?
Yes, the Wu family and the Zhang family are close. He has followed me around since he was little, and I'm practically his sister. I have to help with finding him a partner.
James looked down at Ethan. There was a hint of joy in his eyes, and his mouth curved up. She was really curious about what made him so happy. Ethan moved closer to James, snuggling up. This affectionate gesture surprised James, and before he knew it, he kissed Ethan on the lips.
Sleep now. You're tired too.
Ethan closed his eyes and snuggled closer. Just as dawn was breaking, a servant reported that the eldest daughter of the Wu family had arrived. James struggled to get up, and Ethan rubbed his eyes.
Who is it?
Martha, probably here about Lucas. You go back to sleep.
Ethan closed his eyes and murmured an acknowledgement.
James, come quickly.
So early? Are you inviting them for breakfast? That's too stingy. Your brother is choosing a partner, and you don't take it seriously.
Martha walked over, patted James's shoulder, frowned, and raised her voice.
Of course not. I'm here early because I care. Look, I've spent a long time picking these names. Lucas has seen them too, and he seems to have a bit of interest in the Minister of Revenue's daughter.
James looked at the list and nodded. These people had good reputations in the capital.
All right, let's see them at noon. If Lucas likes her, let them spend some time together and see how he feels.
Martha nodded too. Before they knew it, it was already noon. James looked at the Minister of Revenue's daughter, Emily. Rumors might be false after all.
General Zhang, I toast to you. Lucas told me he admired you the most when he was little.
James looked up at her. Lucas told her? Interesting. She might as well say there's something between them. James nodded, watched her finish her drink, and then she bowed and went over to Martha. Finally, the meal was over. James patted Martha's shoulder, who looked serious and conflicted.
No need to choose anymore. Go ask Lucas what's going on between him and Emily.
James told Ethan about it, and his eyes were full of envy.
Their meeting is so beautiful.
James looked down at him and hugged him tighter.
Actually, our meeting was beautiful too.
Ethan looked up at him, puzzled.
Do you remember the Mid-Autumn Festival banquet at the palace when you were 10?
Ethan lowered his head, frowned in thought, then looked up at James with surprise in his eyes. He excitedly grabbed James's hand, his voice cautious and probing.
Was it you wearing the mask that day?
Yes, it was me. I took a little crybaby to the rooftop of the cold palace to watch the moon and stole mooncakes from the imperial kitchen for him. I told that little crybaby I would marry him.
Upon hearing this, Ethan started to laugh, tears streaming down his face, his voice choked.
You said you would come to see me from time to time, but you didn't. I waited for so long, and you never came.
I patted his head and gently wiped away his tears, explaining softly.
At that time, the war was intense. I didn't have time to see you before my mother dragged me off to fight. I felt terrible not being able to see you. Back then, I thought if I could achieve great military success and gain Elizabeth's favor, I might have a chance to marry you. I was desperate to make a name for myself. I fought fiercely on the battlefield, earning merits. Even my mother said I seemed possessed. I was fortunate to gain Elizabeth's favor. She made a request, and I agreed.
Ethan clutched my clothes, tears in his eyes but a smile on his face, his voice gaining confidence.
Did you tell the Empress that without me, no one would remember me in the palace?
I held him and sat on a nearby chair, smoothing his hair.
Yes, Elizabeth said all her sons were there. You know how scared I was not seeing you. I was terrified you wouldn't make it until I returned. Thankfully, you were still there, and I brought you back.
He laughed and cried.
Your deputy said you had someone in your heart. Was that person me?
Yes, it was you. I've thought about you for so many years.
And those little trinkets in the study side room, were they for me?
Yes, I thought you didn't like them, so I left them there.
Hearing this, he cried on my shoulder.
James, do you know how scared I was? I was so afraid that if the person in your heart came back, you would abandon me.
Why didn't you ask?
I didn't dare. No one had ever treated me so well. I was afraid that if I asked, you would leave me. I was always wary of every man around you. I was really scared.
I hugged him and apologized softly.
I'm sorry. I should have told you earlier.
He hit me lightly, choking on his words.
It's all your fault, making me worry.
Okay, it's my fault.
A lively atmosphere enveloped us.
Today is really lively.
Since we cleared things up, Ethan's mood improved a lot. He no longer had that hint of distance in his eyes.
Yes, today is Lucas's wedding. It's very lively.
He touched his ear and playfully hit me. In the distance, fireworks and firecrackers sounded, and I saw Ethan's eyes light up.
In a few days, I'll take you somewhere special to watch fireworks.
No, I want to see them today.
All right, I'll make it happen.
After the banquet, I carried Ethan onto the carriage. His face was flushed, and his eyes were drunk. I gently tapped Ethan's head. This little rascal dared to drink while I wasn't around.
You hit me.
Who told you to drink?
You hit me.
I didn't hit you, just a light tap.
You hit me.
I sighed. Indeed, reasoning with a drunk was impossible.
Okay, my fault. Sit still, all right?
He covered his head, staring at me, not moving an inch. He looked incredibly cute.
Do you still want to see the fireworks?
I carefully wiped his face, asking softly. He stared at me, frowning, and then slapped my hand away.
Don't touch me. My wife will get upset.
All right, I won't touch you. Just sleep, okay?
I affectionately ruffled his hair and sighed. It seemed we wouldn't be able to watch the fireworks tonight. Maybe tomorrow.
Do you know where my wife is?
I tucked him in and looked at his sleepy eyes, smiling.
Once you fall asleep, your wife will come.
He stared at me for a while, then closed his eyes. When I returned after arranging my things, I saw his eyes open again, filled with tears.
What's wrong, Ethan?
My wife doesn't want me anymore.
Why would she not want you?
She didn't come to find me.
She had something to take care of just now. Isn't she here now?
I lay beside him, patiently comforting him.
Wife.
You recognized me.
Wife, can you not take any more consorts?
I wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes, my voice soft but firm.
I won't take any more consorts. Having you is enough.
He seemed not to understand and repeated himself.
Wife, can you not take any more consorts?
I chuckled softly and repeated myself. The night was still long. My little darling fell asleep while asking the same question over and over. Tomorrow, I would tease him about this, he was just too adorable.